Cops of Reddit. What has so far been the worst call you've ever had to respond to, and what happened? Not a cop myself, but my dad is, and I asked him this one time. He told me it was when he went to this one house because a woman had called and said that men were breaking into the house. He gets there and he said it was immediately very clear that the woman was not exactly all together mentally. He said she kept mumbling things and was very jumpy and skittish, not to mention that every single wall of her house apparently had at least 6 or 7 crosses on it, if not more. He calms her down, checks around the house for any signs of entry or just anything weird, and there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that anyone had been trying to or had been successful in breaking in. He said she followed him around the entire time and would point to things, like a doorknob or window latches, and say, "Oh, that's not where I left it." That's how they got in. He said the whole thing was fairly eerie, considering he was at this woman's house in the middle of the night, surrounded by crosses and listening to her mumble on about random shit. To make her feel better, he did a sweep of the whole house to see if there was anyone else inside, which there wasn't. He said the one thing that made it creepy for him was the fact that every few minutes she'd say something like, "Oh, they're here again," or "He's right behind us, I can feel it." UK. Got called to assist ambulance at an address because they were struggling with a woman who'd had an apparent seizure. We got there and she's this tiny skinny little Singaporean lady who's being held down on the floor by a paramedic. She's hissing and struggling against her and repeatedly trying to bite the paramedic. Her eyes are all black and red, no white. It takes me, 200 pounds, my partner for the evening, 180 pounds, plus 3 paramedics to hold her down. All the time she's struggling and trying to bite with veins popping out of her neck. She's looking past us at the corner of the room screaming at something that isn't there, telling it not to kill her and us. Her husband, who seems weirdly unfazed by the whole thing, tells us this has been happening since she last went to Singapore and got sick after visiting a holy site. Usually her sister has to stop it by putting this powder on her forehead and a cross, but unfortunately she's out of the country. In the end she was taken to hospital for a mental health assessment by the paramedics. I often wonder what the outcome was but have no way of finding out, unfortunately. Got a call that someone wasn't answering their phone or the doorbell. We got to the house and noticed that every window was blinded by either curtains or pieces of paper. We rang the doorbell and yelled through the letterbox, but there was no answer. We opened the door and got inside. In the house it looked like someone just had lunch. There was bread on the table and juice or milk in the glasses. Children's toys scattered all around. Then I saw a note that gave me the chills. It was a suicide note. As the door was locked from the inside, the person had to be in the house. We checked room by room and my heartbeat was at 300% when I checked the bathroom. Preparing myself for slit wrists or throats, I opened the door slowly, but there was nothing. Finally one more room left, which was the attic. We walked slowly up the stairs and we found the resident there, hanging from a beam. I will never forget the adrenaline I had, the scene in the living room or the resident I found. Working third shift on Halloween night, I'm out by one of our smaller lakes just outside the city limits. Kids love to go out and drink, which is surrounded by some very nice houses. Going through the neighborhood, each of the roads ends at a small 2-lane road that surrounds the lake. I'm slowing to the stop sign and already starting to look to my right to make the turn when my headlights start tracing the rock wall that surrounds the lake. I catch something out of the corner of my eye in one of the large trees that dots the walk path. I back up to see what it was and I see a guy hanging. At first I thought it was a Halloween decoration. The neighborhood is really into decorating for every holiday, so I stop, get out, and as soon as my flashlight hits him I realize, nope, no decoration, he dead. As I'm standing there getting ready to call it in, I notice a gaggle of kids coming down the street trick or treating. Shit, as soon as they see my car they start heading my way faster, so I book it back up the block to meet the parent walking with them and tell her she needs to take the long way around the block the other way. She can see it on my face, I'm not kidding. Turns out he was a 20-year-old that was devastated about his girlfriend breaking up with him, and she lived in the last house on that block where she would see him the next morning when she looked out her window. I posted this before when a similar thread like this popped. Not me, but my friend is a cop in a major Canadian metropolitan, and one night that we were supposed to go out after his shift, he decided to pick me up in his cop car, since he was almost finished his shift and was just going to drop the car back at the depot. On the way though, he got a call that someone was complaining about noises coming from their basement that sounded like a person, so he decided to make that his last stop. I was told to wait in the car, while he talked with homeowner and checked it out. He was gone for about half an hour before we came back and had this terrified/amazed face on him. Apparently the homeowner was hearing loud thuds from his basement for a couple of weeks, but on the day of the call they were really loud and scaring him. He had a walk-in basement, so he thought maybe someone had broken in. My friend goes to the basement to check it out with the homeowner. Basement is all dark and the lights need to be turned on from the electrical panel. So they get to the panel and my friend says he saw something in the corner of his eye. He turns around and at an end of a hallway which leads to a cold storage he sees a guy facing the door of the cold storage just standing there. He yells at the guy to turn around but he doesn't. Homeowner sees him too and is really scared. Friend asks the guy to turn around once more before hitting the switch for the lights and the guy/ghost at the cold storage just disappears when the lights come on. My friend swore that he searched every inch of that basement and could not find anyone else there. Homeowner is shook up and says he's gonna stay with a friend for a night and my friend calls another cop to survey the house to see if anyone tries to enter the main house or basement. Not sure what happened after but my friend swears he saw someone in that basement. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone, and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out the top of her neck, and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving but needed tons of plastic surgery. I was a resident director at a student dorm and we'd get calls from helicopter moms that hadn't heard from their child in 3 days, so I'd occasionally have to do wellness checks. I was never really concerned because kids are too busy getting stoned, shagging, studying, and drinking to call mom every night, but I had one call that I was prepared to see something ugly. It was for a resident I knew pretty well who was always a bit down, who didn't really have any friends, and gave off a weird vibe, but I knew she was close to her parents and walked around calling them a lot. Keying into her room, I was ready to see her in the tub or with a belt around her neck or a spilled pill bottle somewhere. Nope, she was shacked in with a new F-buddy and they'd turned the dorm into one large fort complete with rooms and video game lounge and had been too busy shagging and smoking dope to remember to call mom. She hadn't heard me knocking over their noise making and both were quite upset I'd barged in. This may be quite tame compared to other posts, but so far it's the creepiest for myself. An elderly woman had called in reporting that a man carrying a drawstring bag was walking around her and her husband's property. She described the man as walking like a zombie and was looking down towards the ground the entire time. She wasn't able to tell if the man was attempting to break in or not. My partner and I were about 15 minutes away when the call came in from dispatch. When we were about halfway there, the elderly woman had reported that her husband, who was downstairs watching the front yard with shotgun in hand by the front door, told her that he watched the trespasser disappear into a cornfield that was across the street from their house. My partner and I quickly searched the area around the cornfield, then went to the house. As I took down some information from both the husband and wife, my partner searched the property for any signs of tampering but found nothing. We then patrolled the area for a good 10 or so minutes hoping to find the man but didn't. We responded to a burglary alarm at a mortuary and found that one of the rear doors was left open. Policy now dictates that the entire building needs to be cleared, searched, to confirm that it was a false alarm, which most are. It's the middle of the night and totally dark. We use flashlights and never turn on lights. We walk into one of the rooms and see a body on a table. It appeared that it was waiting to be processed, possibly embalmed, by the mortician. It smelled like a mildly decomposing body. Suddenly I see a shadow to my right and I shine my light there and find nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately smell a really strong whiff of perfume blow by me. The search was completed more expeditiously than normal after that. Nothing was found. Now I'm not a mortician or anything, but I feel like it's kind of weird to just leave a body out overnight. Was there ever some kind of follow-up? It's not odd. Bodies don't decompose for 2 to 3 days at room temp. They can be stored in the fridge for about a month, freezer long term. In cold climates, the ground freezes and they hold them until it thaws for the actual burial if there's not a religious issue. I'm not a funeral director, but I work at a funeral home. I stopped a 25-year-old Asian male from entering the east executive entrance of the White House. He had slit his wrists and neck prior to his arrival, but not deep enough to hit major blood vessels. He told me that he was a secret agent working for J. Edgar Hoover and that he was 60 years old. He said he had important information to pass to President Obama. I ended up having to detain him, stop the bleeding and then involuntarily commit him. Turned out to be a local college kid, going through some mental health issues. I've field interviewed hundreds of White House callers but this kid took the cake. Not a cop, but a correctional officer in Texas. One time a guy slit the forearm side of his elbows, where it bends. He laid there in a big puddle of his own blood. I was one of the responders that day. I'll never forget it. As soon as you entered the cell, the smell just hit you. Blood has a strong metallic smell, which I never realized before. He'd been laying there a while, So the blood had coagulated, which again, I did not expect. As we lifted the barely conscious guy out of the blood fell off his body in chunks, like jello. It was pretty disturbing because I didn't expect any of it, nor was I able to mentally prepare for it. We're not really medically trained, so all of it was completely surprising to me. From my post 8 months ago, got a call for a missing child, got to the home to find the mother highly distressed, and not sure what to do. I called in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooded lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees, so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. I was in search and rescue and we had the same sort of issue. There is often family around the search site. We had a policy that you say you found a red shoe, which meant that we were to switch to an alternative channel, which we were not licensed for, so that the news could not listen in, and the COs were supposed to move away from any family members. Maybe worth setting up something similar in your area. Man, this was probably 2010, 2011. I was really new. Call came, I'm as an unknown problem. Basically the 911 was so fucked up, even dispatch didn't know what to call it. Turned out this guy had just murdered his stepfather and then walked to his grandparents' house to kill them as well. He stabbed his grandmother through the eye with a Rambo-style Bowie knife, one that had the compass in the pommel of the handle. He missed her brain by about 1/8 of an inch, so she did not die. Instead, she came running out of the house when we got there, knife sticking out of her fucking eye, and the compass was spinning around because she was moving. My brain literally went, "That's not real," and I went past her, along with several other cops, before the sergeant was like, "What in the actual fuck are you guys doing?" She survived. We caught the guy in a stroke of pure luck. Elderly woman with a massive hunting knife for an eye, definitely the creepiest thing I can remember seeing. Not mine, but my sibling is a police officer and shared this story with me that I can't get out of my head. It'll stick with me till the day I die. He was responding to a domestic disturbance in a pretty shitty apartment complex near Detroit. They reported that there was a lot of screaming and banging on the second floor for a full hour before everything went quiet. Being a shitty neighborhood, they didn't bother to call until things started to smell. So my brother and his partner walked up to the door, waited and got no response except for a faint meowing. Finding the door unlocked, they enter. Things around the living room were tossed around. The TV was busted, as well as a few holes in the wall from where some large fellow obviously punched it in his anger. No big deal so far, but they had to clear the apartment considering there were 2 voices reported in the kerfuffle and so far 0 people. They go to the bedroom, turn the handle, and instead of the door swinging open, my brother ends up walking into it with his shoulder because something has it wedged closed. At this point, he knew what he was about to walk into, so he gave his partner that look and shoved the door. A multicolored cat ran out, its white fur not so white anymore. A bit pink around the face, in fact. Directly on the other side of her door was where the female of the argument ended up laying, back against it, half-seated. She was barely recognizable as a human, for beside her was a piece of the bed. A wood post, torn off and used to bludgeon her. Repeatedly. They looked around the room and there were bloody handprints everywhere, looking like they originated from the bed and rotated around the room. A good amount of smears of blood and handprints were around the window and its locks, the girl having desperately tried to claw open the window to scream for help. A few chunks of fingernails lay on the sill and the floor below. Turns out they'd nailed the window shut, again, shitty neighborhood, so there was no getting that open. The handprints circled the room, as well as a few face prints for when her head was smashed against the wall, all leading up to her final resting place beside the door. There were bite marks on her face as well, when the cat got hungry enough and started to help itself to the needed pulp that remained after her beating. The man was never caught. He was a live-in boyfriend that was supplying her with crack apparently. The cat went to a loving home after being sheltered. A loving, tasty new home. Edit, for those asking, well, how did he get out? Same way my brother got in. Through the door. I'm assuming she sat up after the boyfriend left to reflect on her life choices while drowning in her own blood draining down into her lungs. In other words, I don't know. I wasn't there when it happened. Detention officer at a local jail here. We had a guy get brought in about 2 a.m. one night who we immediately knew was about to give us a fun time based on the way he was moving, quickly snapping the head back and forth, looking all over the room, etc. One of my coworkers and I stay with the booking officer to help her out when the shit inevitably hits the fan. The guy keeps rambling on throughout the whole process, Parts of his speech are understandable but most of it is gibberish. At one point he looks up at my coworker and says, "Would you blame me for it?" Trying to keep the guy calm, my coworker tells him, "Nah, man, no one can blame you." For whatever reason this set the guy off. He leaps off the bench and we both push him back down. My coworker is trying to get handcuffs on his other wrist. He was already handcuffed by one hand to the bench, and I'm holding him against the wall with every bit of strength I have. This motherfucker was strong. I swear the bench was about to come up off the concrete when he first leapt at us. Once my coworker gets handcuffs on him, we take a step back. The guy throws his head back, eyes rolled all the way back, and lets out an inhuman scream that I've only heard in movies about demon possession. He then moves his head as if he's looking around the room, but still with his eyes rolled into the back of his head and spouts off more nonsense. I'm not Catholic but I was very tempted to cross myself. The screaming, head throwing back and eye rolling continue on for about 45 minutes. Every so often he'd come back to reality and talk to us like a normal person for a moment and then go back into crazy mode.